Well, thank you all. Thank you all very much. My great thanks to the Lannan Foundation in particular for making this possible, for bringing me here, and more than that, for bringing to all of us the voices that we so desperately need in these very difficult times. Voices sometimes of the voiceless, other times voices that are out there but not taken seriously enough, not heard enough. We need those voices, and I think that what we have learned from those alternative voices, we've learned, among other things, that cultural freedom isn't something we can simply assert. We have to fight for it. And the Lannan Foundation has led us in that fight and has done an extraordinary job. And I thank them all for that, for making this possible. You know, this is a very difficult time in our country. The violence of our country is coming back to haunt us in very immediate and powerful and horrifying ways. It has taken a huge national level of mobilization to even begin the process of finding justice for Trayvon Martin. It took that mobilization and the reality, the stark reality of the murder of this young black kid, to even begin the possibility of finding justice for the murderers in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where there is such a legacy of racist violence. And our country is immersed in this violence. It's part of our history, it's part of our present, it's part of our expansion abroad, and it's part of what happens in our own communities, in our own homes. We don't hear very often about US war crimes. We hear about wars. We don't hear about the crimes that come with those wars. We hear when there is an occasional expose, like the recent attack in Afghanistan, the recent massacre in Afghanistan. We hear this is not what our nation is about. This is not what we stand for. We heard from President Obama, this incident is tragic and shocking and does not represent the exceptional character of our military and the respect that the United States has for the people of Afghanistan. It was extraordinary because, of course, it's absolutely exactly what we stand for, what the character of our military is, because they are trained, like all militaries, to kill. Ours are just trained a little better to do it a little bit more methodically. Is that the word? I don't even know what the word is. The responsibility for this massacre has to go up. Yes, Sergeant Bales bears clear responsibility. Soldiers can be victims as well as war criminals. They can and often are both. But the responsibility doesn't stop there. It has to go right up to the top of the political and the military command structures of our country if we have any hope of changing that history so that we are not seen around the world as the country that brings violence and calls it democracy. I think that we never hear, in a case like that of Trayvon Martin, we never hear that a young black man walking on an early evening was talking about self-defense. That was left to the other guy. You know, in our discourse, we don't hear about them feeling nervous. That's left for the other guy, for the white folks who feel nervous, who are afraid that maybe they need to use self-defense. It's something that we hear about our wars. We're hearing more and more now, and it's important that we hear about the numbers of our young veterans who are coming back from these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, so damaged, physically assaulted, physically impoverished in a way of what their life will be in the future, and mentally, with huge mental disorders, mental disabilities, PTSD, and so much more. We hear more about that. In fact, this morning in your newspaper, in the New Mexican, this extraordinary piece, Military Issued Pills Put Troops in Fog of Drugs and War.
Okay, everybody in their seats, please. Phyllis, I want to start with where you left off about how do we get there, and there's a lot of work to do. Here is a flyer that is being circulated locally. No attack on Iran. Some people in this audience may know of this. The Santa Fe City Council is having a meeting on May 9th in which you are all urged to attend. How significant are initiatives like this?
Local initiatives like this, I think, are huge. You know, we saw in the run-up to the war in Iraq that one of the real strengths of the peace movement that became a global movement was the fact that there were city councils and mayors and state assemblies and governors all across the country that were taking up the anti-war commitment and passing resolutions and making declarations. And they were all different. They almost all shared the view that we won't go to war, we won't support a war without UN support, which we knew we didn't have. But the fact, it wasn't as if, you know, the mayor of Santa Fe controls the army and can call back the Pentagon, but it did show the lack of legitimacy of that war. That was huge. And in a few cases, for example, in Montana, hardly a bastion of progressive anti-war sentiment, right? Well, what was important was the governor passed an incredible resolution and made a great declaration about really demanding that the White House send home his National Guard troops. He wasn't against the war, so he said, but he was worried that they were going to have a really bad wildfire season, and he didn't want to be caught with his National Guard troops off fighting somewhere else instead of being home to fight the wildfires. There is a cost to our communities when first responders, when teachers are called off to the war. Look at how many thousands of the soldiers are actually reservists. So there's a very immediate sense, as well as the costs that we spoke of before, to our communities for these wars.
What do you see as the emerging contours of U.S. Foreign policy, particularly its trajectory in light of an obvious economic decline?
Yeah, I think this is something that's going to play out quite dramatically in the election cycle. I think one of the things that we're going to be seeing is, aside from the sort of broad ideological divide between those who think that government is the problem and those who think that corporations are the problem, and that corporate control of government is the problem, I think we're also going to see a divide over whether we can acknowledge that there are consequences for being in the midst of an economic downturn.